So next up we have Tanya Mead speaking to us about human trafficking and disabilities.
Y'all, I'm old. I just gotta tell you, I'm old, and I got older last year. So y'all just gonna have to put up with me a little bit. How many in here besides me are old? Thank you. All right, so y'all are gonna help me out and identify with me. Give me lots of grace today, right? All right, so I'm here to talk to you about human trafficking, why people with disabilities are more vulnerable. And human trafficking and people with disabilities, it's nothing new, right? In fact, one of the very first cases of human trafficking that were identified in the United States involved a begging and peddling ring in New York City back in the 90s. So what is human trafficking? And I'm sure that you guys have talked about this today. Human trafficking is a modern day form of slavery involving the illegal trade of people for exploitation or commercial gain. So if I were to say the word slavery to you, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Black people, okay? What about the second thing? Force, yep. What else? Free work, okay? Anything else? Image, whatever. What do you see in your brain, in your head? If you were to see a picture of it, what would it look like? Abuse, torture, absolutely, cotton, right? So all of these things that we associate with slavery are elements of human trafficking. But I thought slavery was abolished over 150 years ago, right? It's illegal. Well, the fact is that slavery is illegal in every country on this planet. The fact is that there are more slaves today than ever before in human history, even at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. So traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion, and I'm sure that Jamara talked to you guys about that, to lure their victims and force them into labor or commercial sexual exploitation. So what do we mean by force? Rape, beatings, confinement, okay? Torture, depriving someone of food and sleep. Fraud could be false offers of employment, marriage, a better life. Things like that. Coercion, basically lying to someone, threats of deportation or arrest. It could be threats to your life, it could be threats to your family members. Personal safety. It could be threatening other victims. Oftentimes traffickers will beat and abuse other victims, and the ones that are watching are like, you know what? I don't want to have anything, I don't want that to happen to me, so I better do what my trafficker says, or I'm going to be a victim of that as well. Debt bondage, withholding wages, legal documents, psychological manipulation, just to name a few. So all of these things are ways that traffickers lure and they control their victims. So, as in all cases of human trafficking, trafficking in victims with disabilities involve force, fraud, and or coercion. But in some cases, they also involve an additional element, and that is the theft of their Social Security or disability benefits. How many of you know somebody that has a disability? It's incredible, right? So let's talk about benefit theft for a minute. So we're just going to talk about, I'm going to briefly just refer to a case that has been called the basement of horrors. And as you can see the headline here, woman admits confining disabled people in squalor, forcing two into prostitution. And this actually is what happened. So she and 4 other co-defendants held 6 adults with cognitive disabilities in forced labor and sexual servitude for years, even forcing some of them to have children. Yep. She targeted individuals with disabilities who were estranged from their families, convincing them to move into her home. Once they did so, she became their representative payee, stealing her victims' Social Security benefits. They kept the captives locked in closets, cabinets, basements, and attics, and subjected them to extreme physical and sexual abuse. And unfortunately, 2 of their victims died in captivity. Incredible, right? And unfortunately, it's true. It's sad but true. People with disabilities are particularly vulnerable to human trafficking. In fact, according to the United States Department of State Trafficking in Persons report, people with disabilities are especially vulnerable to human trafficking, and we're going to look at that why. And I just want you to think about, since we're in church here, right? All right, in the Gospel of Matthew, think about that, what Jesus said, right? Whatever you have done to the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. right? And I submit to you that people with disabilities are some of the least of these, my brethren, right? So we have to be especially vigilant when it comes to people with disabilities. All right, so here's just the statistics. From January 2015 to December 2017, the National Human Trafficking Hotline has documented 2,116 potential victims that had a pre-existing health concern or disability immediately prior to their trafficking situation. This includes a possible physical disability, mental health diagnosis. What is this? Substance use concern. Did you guys know that that's considered as a disability? Or intellectual or developmental disability. So people with disabilities are the single largest minority group in the United States. Single largest minority group in the United States. They tend to be poorer, less educated, and less employed than people without disabilities. They're often relying on others for assistance, and that reliance leads to vulnerability, and they are 2 to 3 times more likely to be victimized than their non-disabled peers. When you think about it, it's really incredible. 2 to 3 times more likely. At the end of the day, trafficking is somebody exploiting the vulnerability of somebody else for their own greed, for their own gain. So vulnerability is key, and understanding vulnerability is key. Y'all, we can't prevent stuff we don't understand, right? So people with disabilities often have an inability to detect who is safe. Their frequent contact and dependency on caregivers, friends, and family. They depend on people for lots of things, right? So they have people that are always touching them. And certain people, or people with certain disabilities, have people touch them in places that we would consider private. All right, so if you have someone touching you that way for your care, the lines get a little blurry, it gets a little fuzzy. Well, how do I know if this person, what they're doing is safe or not? How do I know if this touch is inappropriate or not? Right? And when we talk about touch, we have to stop saying good touch and bad touch, because you know what? God designed our bodies a certain way, and sometimes a touch will feel good even though it's inappropriate or it's not safe. Yeah. Right? So we have to be careful about use of community services. So oftentimes people with disabilities, right, come in contact with all kinds of people in all kinds of different community organizations. So when you're getting aid and help from all different kinds of people, sometimes it gets a little bit tricky to figure out and to understand who is a safe person or not, because I depend on a lot of different people for my care and to get through my day. By nature, people with disabilities are usually pleasers, right? They want to please. Okay, so that makes them particularly vulnerable. And also, we just talked about the inability to distinguish between appropriate touch. So, communication deficits. Somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing. A speech impairment can hinder the inability to report. What if you can't speak? How am I going to call the human trafficking hotline? How am I going to call 911 if I can't speak? All right, I timed it in my shower this morning. I'm sorry, I do weird things in the shower. But I said, okay, please help me, I'm a victim of human trafficking. It took me less than 10 seconds, right, to say that out loud. I want you to turn the person next to you, and without words, I want you to tell them that you're a victim of human trafficking. You got 10 seconds to do it. Without words. Go. Time's up. How many of you were successful? So you can see, right, where an inability or difficulty in communicating presents a huge vulnerability. All right, and the assumption of inability to effectively communicate. So when someone, with a person with a disability, and this is not just human trafficking, this is crime in general, right? So oftentimes there's assumptions by people, right? Just the general population that somebody with a disability, even if they don't have an intellectual disability, just can't communicate. They're ineffective. They don't understand what's happened to them, right? So when they try to make a report, sometimes they're not always taken seriously, and that same reason is what makes them particularly vulnerable to a trafficker. Because if I'm a trafficker, right? And I see you as someone that, hey, if I target you and I know you can't effectively communicate as a result of your disability, I'm going to pick you because why? Right? You're an easy target because you're going to be less likely to report. And if you do report, people aren't going to believe you anyway. Right? So, untreated mental health disorders. Y'all, we have a lot of people that have mental health issues that have never been diagnosed. Right? And there's such a stigma when it comes to mental health. Right? If somebody has cancer, there's no stigma against that, right? Right? So mental health is the same thing. Guys, we have to change the conversation around mental health in this country. We really do. So there's a lot of people that have never been diagnosed because what happens once we get diagnosed, there's a stigma attached to that, right? Or there are people that perhaps have been diagnosed, but for one reason or another, they're not taking their medication. Maybe they can't afford it, right? Or maybe they just don't want to take it. Who knows the side effects? You know, sometimes the medication has more side effects than the disease. And I am not giving anybody an out for not taking their medication. It's just that we need to be careful about passing judgment. All right, people with a learning disability, intellectual disabilities, or impaired judgment. Again, sometimes they don't always understand what's happening to them. They don't understand what a crime is. They don't understand that they've been a victim of a crime, right? And lack of knowledge of their rights. If you don't even know you're a victim of a crime, you may not know that you have rights. Right? If you are somebody that has a type of disability that people are caring for you, you may not think you have any rights at all to begin with. Right? I don't have any right to my body because guess what? It's not my own. It belongs to the medical doctors. It belongs to my caregivers. It belongs to everybody else that touches me. I have no say. Right? I have no rights. All crime victims have rights and learn from it, kind of reflect on it. What are our own attitudes? Do we have prejudices and biases against people with disabilities? Right? And if we do, then let's examine those. Let's think about that. And how can maybe I've been wrong, right? Maybe I need to look at this a little differently. Okay? So, here's a case, and I wanted to read this from the press release from the United States Department of Justice. This case is a little tough to hear, all right, but it's going to tie all of those things that we've talked about so far together. All right, so this is about an Ashland woman in Ashland, Ohio, who was sentenced to 32 years in prison for labor trafficking and related crimes involving a disabled woman. So there were two people that were charged here. Jessica Hunt, she's 32. She was sentenced to 32 years in prison. And Jordy Callahan, who was 28, was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Okay? So Callahan and Hunt used a combination of violence, threats, sexual assaults, humiliation, deprivation, and monitoring to establish and continue a pattern of domination and control over their victims. Identified only as SE and BE, according to the court documents and trial testimony. Their tactics included beating SE, threatening to beat SE and BE, taunting and threatening the victims with pit bulls and snakes, causing the victims to sleep in unsafe and unsanitary conditions, restricting their access to the bathroom, preventing them from eating regular and suitable meals, and forcing SE to eat dog food and crawl on the floor while wearing a dog collar, according to the court documents and trial testimony. Callahan pointed a firearm at SE's head and threatened to kill her if she did not perform the labor and services he and other conspirators commanded. Callahan also forced SE on multiple occasions to engage in sex acts with him and threatened that he and Hunt would kill SE if she told anyone about the forced sexual acts. All right, so oftentimes people say, well, why don't they just run away? Right, Jamaro?
Yeah.
They free, right? They're not chained to a bed. Sometimes they are, more oftentimes they're not. They could be sitting in my desk in the school next to me, right? They could be sitting in my church pew. Why don't they just run away? Would you? Callahan and Hunt recruited SE and BE to live with them in their 2-bedroom apartment in Ashland Knowing that S.E. suffered a traumatic brain injury that left her with a cognitive disability, and that both S.E. and B.E. received monthly public assistance payments. They were after those benefits. So, in August 2011, there was another defendant, last name McGuire, smashed S.E.'s hand with a rock with such force that S.E. needed to go to the hospital emergency room. Callahan, Hunt, and McGuire then forced S.E. to give them the narcotic pain pills and prescription for narcotic pain pills she obtained after being treated at the emergency room. Right? So the victim goes to the hospital. Right? Did you know that the vast majority of human trafficking victims intersect healthcare provider at some point in their trafficking, the time they're being trafficked? That's why it's super important that we educate and train healthcare personnel. All right, and the coalition has been doing that, and other entities in Palm Beach County have been doing that. But it's super important. So that was in August 2011. Again, in December 2011, they injured S.E.'s back with such force, again, that she kicked S.E. in the hip with such force that she needed medical treatment. They again forced her to give them the narcotic pain pills and prescription for narcotic pain pills she obtained after being treated. On multiple occasions between August 2010 and October 2012, Callahan and Hunt threatened S.E. and B.E. with serious physical harm, including death, if S.E. did not clean up the apartment, care for their numerous pit bull dogs, snakes, and other reptiles, purchase items at their store, and perform other labor and services ordered by the conspirators. Callahan and Hunt used a video camera to monitor their activities and conversations in the apartment. They often forced S.E. to walk to the store to buy groceries, cigarettes, dog food, and other items for Callahan, Hunt, and Hunt's 4 sons, and to pay for these purchases with her public assistance card. They allotted her only a brief time period to complete the shopping and warned her that she was not allowed to speak with anyone while she was out. They frequently required her, B.E., to remain with them at the apartment while S.E. was out, and threatened physical harm to both of them if S.E. broke any of the rules. So even if she's out, she's thinking, they're watching. They're watching. Callahan and Hunt, also threatened to contact Ashland County Job and Family Services and have B.E. taken away if S.E. purchased any items at the store other than those they ordered, or if she told anyone about their unlawful conduct. So guess what? If you tell, I have pictures, I'm gonna get your kid taken away from you. How many of you in here are parents? How many of you would do whatever it took to keep your kids? In June 2011, after S.E. and B.E. had attempted to flee the apartment, Callahan and Hunt ordered the 2 other co-defendants to find both of the victims and bring them back to the apartment. They lured them back into their vehicle by promising to take them to Dairy Queen, only to deposit them afterwards back at the apartment. So they try to flee, and what happens? They got caught, and where'd they go? Right back. On multiple occasions, Callahan and Brown locked both of the victims in a room with a window that was nailed shut and a door that had been locked from the outside. In October 2011, Callahan and Hunt forced S.E. to hit her child while they recorded a video and threatened to inflict much greater physical harm on both of them if she didn't comply. Think about that. One month later, Callahan and Hunt again forced S.E. to strike B.E. while they captured a video recording of the stage incident on Callahan's cell phone. Callahan and Hunt repeatedly threatened to have B.E. taken away by showing the videos to authorities in order to secure S.E.'s compliance to the conspirators' commands. This is not a sensationalized newspaper article. This is from the United States Attorney's Office, taken from trial, testimony, and trial records. When I first got into this work, I would hear these cases and I would think, oh, there's no way. There's no way. How many of you sit here honestly and heard about this and stuff and thought, you know what, no, that doesn't happen. Couldn't happen, right? None of us could conceive of that happening because we're generally decent people, right? I use generally loosely, especially when I talk about myself. But, okay, but it happens. It's sad, but it's true. And y'all, these people are not calling the hotline, right? Is when the person with disabilities, they may not even be able to, right? But even if they could, would they? Would you? Right? So that's why it's so important that you guys are here. Right? It's so important that you guys are here. Because the majority of tips that come to the National Human Trafficking Hotline come from community members like you and me. Right? So remember, she'd gone to the store. She had gone to, they had sent her other places in the community. Right? And although she was threatened not to talk to anybody, but you know what? We talk about force. So there could have been injuries that maybe somebody in one of these businesses had seen that could have maybe prompted something. All right? There could have been some behavior. So it's really important that we all understand what this is. So if we ever see something, we say something. Look, even if you're not sure, if your stomach, the spidey sense goes off, right? And you're like, oh, I'm not sure, make a phone call. Better to make a phone call and be wrong than not make a phone call and miss the opportunity to save a life. Right? So how many of you have this number in your cell phone? All right, if you do not, I want you to take your cell phones out right now, and I want you to put this number in your cell phone, because if you ever have the opportunity to make a phone call, I don't want you to have to Google, God, what did they say that was? What if you're in a place with crappy cell service, right? You want this in your contacts. 888-373-7888. It's a 24/7 hotline. 24/7, 365. It's answered in over a bajillion languages, right? It's not the police. Hey, I get it. Yeah, bajillion. That is a legit number, by the way. All right. So some people go, you know what? And as we, Jamar, don't we as people that are educating and training, we give the hotline number. We just figure people are going to call. Right. Right. We assume you guys are going to call. Right. But just like victims don't call, community members don't call. Right. Why do you think that is? Huh?
They don't want to get involved.
They're scared. They don't want to get involved, right? Hey man, something might be going on next door, and they find out it was me. I know those traffickers are bad dudes. Like, I'm out. I let somebody else do it. But I just want to let you know that this is not the police. Okay, when you make a phone call or you text, it's not the police. The hotline is answered by advocates, highly trained advocates. You make an anonymous report. Nobody's going to know it was you. Okay, you just tell them what you saw, and they'll figure out what to do with it. If it needs to be elevated to law enforcement, they'll get it to the correct law enforcement that has been specifically trained in human trafficking. Okay, or you can text help or info to be free, or if you need to use TYY, you can dial 711 to access the hotline that way. So, before I'm going to take just a couple minutes to talk to you about my particular agency, because Silo does, we promote independence for people with disabilities, which is why I'm here talking to you about disabilities today. So, we have a victim services program, and in order to be eligible for the program, the individual or the dependent must have a disability. It can be short-term or permanent, pre-existing or acquired. All right, so as a result of being a victim of crime, oftentimes people get a disability. They may not have had a disability prior to their victimization, but as a result of their victimization, they end up with a disability. Could be PTSD, could be traumatic brain injury, lots of different things, okay? So, they have to be a victim of a violent crime or a victim of property crime, reporting or non-reporting. If you are a victim of crime and you decide not to report, we can still provide services for you. Okay, so it doesn't have to be reporting. You may have to make a report if you want to access certain benefits like victims' compensation, but to get access to our services, you do not have to have reported, and you must be a primary or secondary victim of crime. Does everybody understand what a secondary victim of crime is?
No.
Okay, so if I'm a parent, right, and my child is victimized, I am a secondary victim. Okay? Do you want to add anything about that, the secondary? All right. So these are the services that we at Silo provide. As a victim advocate, we can help you with restraining order assistance, court accompaniment. In addition to Palm Beach County, we have an office in the Treasure Coast. And one quote I love from William Wilberforce, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never again say that you did not know.
Amen.
And I'm going to leave you with that.
Good job.
Thank you.